beginning May of this year, there'll be a lot more people. They'll just behave a little, they'll understand things differently. And October of 2024 is going to be the main absolute maximum impact of that second Toria magnetic field, October of 2024.
Right before the 2024 election.
Listen to this. Studies show our mental health changes based on how many or how few wrinkles we have. Anti-aging companies prey on that, but many of their products don't work because they fail to target the root concern that contribute to wrinkles. The true way to attack wrinkle concerns is by going underneath the surface of the skin in ways to promote youthfulness. This is why I highly recommend Multi-Collagen. This amazing product helps restore skin's youthfulness by getting to the root problem that causes the wrinkles. It works because it's a health supplement, not an anti-aging serum. My skin looks better than it has in years thanks to taking it. Supercharge your collagen intake because collagen is the number one protein in our skin, and it's also the number one ingredient in this powder. And if you've been looking for a great way to improve your skin's health and youthfulness, you'll love the wonderful effects of taking collagen. And for the next 24 hours, take 51% off your order by going to healthwithadapt2030.com or click on the link in the description box below. And now on with the video.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kerry Cassidy from Project Camelot and very happy to be here today. So I have David Devine with me, and we're going to be talking about the grand solar minimum. Actually, just heard some news that it may not be as minimum as they thought. So I definitely want to get your take on that. And also the climate, and David is a very knowledgeable guy. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about food, how that's affected by the climate changes we're going through, and much more. So welcome, David. And it's great to have you on the show.
Yeah, thank you. And allowing me to voice my opinion or ideas on how 2022 is going to move and how our society is going to shift during this year, because of the available food supply, the pricing. And I really believe a lot of what we're seeing across the planet is to control access to food when rationing and incredible high food prices come in at the end of the year, and people are going to take to the streets. And then how do you protect yourselves during this time? If you're going to talk about the problem, we might as well talk about some solutions, maybe put a timeline to it through the next few months. And then as we get into 2022, 23, and the apex of 2024, we're going to have the four gas giants forming a perfect square in the outer solar system that hasn't been seen since 79 AD, that will be culminating in October of 2024. But as the Earth rounds the sun and gets caught into this second electromagnetic field, we're going to start to see a lot more, let's say, Earth changes and crustal rifts and splits and a few things in the top couple miles of our crust happening. So if you put all this together, if you knew through cycles of history what the outcome was, you'd try to control as much as you could. You know, I don't like to call them leaders of the planet, but they're trying their very best to control and maintain control in a downward spiral that has happened every 400 years. And this grand solar minimum, magnetic field coupling. So how do they control it? They're going to control access to food, but they needed an excuse to do it. And I think COVID might be one of the reasons why. I know that's a lot to start off with.
Okay, now, before you jump into all that, what I want you to do first is give a little bit of your background, just to remind people. I know I had you on my show before, and there'll be new people watching and such. So can you please do that?
I used to buy coffee in Myanmar, which is a country called Burma. For most people know it as that new name, Myanmar. And that's down near the equator. And I used to buy coffee inter-Asia, and we would buy it down in Pin O Luin, which is an area 1,000 meters, central Myanmar, and then export it out of Yangon. And we would send it up into different places in Asia, mainly Taipei, or up into Tokyo in Japan. And at the time buying, it had been really cold one time we were there, extremely cold. And we were talking to the coffee farmers there, and they said, yes, we'd seen this when our grandfathers were planting coffee, and the British were really trying to expand the coffee trade there in the 1880s, 1890s, that they were getting the top leaf killed on the plants. And they would also overplant out in the fields there, because when they're bringing on new production, they would overplant about 19% on some of the higher elevations. But when it got right around 1,000 meters, they go about 12 to 14% over what they needed, because they knew the saplings in the field would die from the cold. And then I was all global warming at that time, and I thought that doesn't really make sense to me. So I started to look out as just a guy doing business there. Can we get more coffee for the next 5 years and continue to increase the amount? And then I ran into John Casey's research and how these solar cycles really affected our civilization through time. And the more research I did, the more I started to realize, hey, what we're being told isn't really exactly they're trying to explain the changes, but not truly the mechanisms for the change. Again, and then I started to piece it together, like, wait a minute, they're trying to avoid global panic by giving the excuse in advance. So the changes you would see already have a ready-made excuse called global warming. So then you can pin it back on something. Oh, the humans, we can try to stop it, slow it down. But if you're talking about the sun, that's a very different thing. And when we're talking about the solar system and where we're moving through in these different energetic changes, especially we just entered into Aquarius, and these changes of ages have always been through history, a gigantic shift in perception of the human on how they see reality around them, how governments rule people, how economies collapse and reemerge or grow out of something with a new asset class and an asset base in it. And I thought, wait a second, we're going in circles literally here, but we're talking about circles of time on multi-thousand years. And that's how I got into this whole thing. I started to do a little research, and I said, I'm going to throw a few videos out there and see if people like it, disagree. Just let the court of public opinion decide what they would be on that. And, there was a lot of positive responses saying, you know what? The key being, there is an excuse there to explain the changes. Now, if I came at you and said, you know what, there's a second magnetic field forming in the outer solar system, the sun's going to be stepping down in its activity, our jet streams and cloud cells are going to go out of their normal patterns, and it's going to affect the plant and harvest dates, and we're not going to have enough food. It's going to get extremely expensive. We're going to have to ration it for the planet, but keep going to work, paying your taxes, and just think about the future 50 years and put money in your IRA. That's not going to work. So I'm really thinking that they went the other direction into control and not really being forthcoming with the reasons, as they understand there'll be losses here, there, in many places, but they still want to retain their power, so they weren't forthcoming enough. And then people are going to be really, really, really angry once they realize what has happened. So then the world has been militarized. Prepositioned assets are already out there. An enormous amount of forces. So when people do get unruly, or they need to cordon off access to food or protect food shipments like they did in the 1600s in England, it's already there. It's been so incremental, all this rollout of the state that we've seen. But when you see where it's at now, it's already in place to control delivery of food, access to food, and now throwing these vaccine passports. And it is, whoever planned this, nefarious, yes, but absolute genius in the planning. And I hate to say that.
Based on that, why do you think that the planning was so genius? I mean, COVID planning is one thing, right? So there's that to be discussed, but, and that definitely works in here. Okay. But shortages, planning shortages, it's kind of interesting. Now, I do have testimony from farmers who have been paid off to actually burn their crops so that they don't have food available, and they got paid for it. So food has been destroyed. This is engineered, whether it's actually the result of a colder climate, et cetera. I mean, I did start this out by saying, I just saw, I think it was yesterday, they were reporting that the grand solar minimum is actually going the opposite direction right now, and that there's more activity than they expected. It's going in a different direction. Have you heard that? Any thoughts on that?
I have. And if you want to do the daily sunspot count, you're going to go to Silo, SILO.com, and that will put up the daily sunspot. You can roll out through all the solar cycles back to the mid 1700s. Now, right. if you want to split a hair on that, which I think we should split the hair, is because the original forecast, they forecast solar cycles just like they do hurricane seasons. They were coming out saying that this solar cycle is going to be well above the last one, 115, 120 spots average for the cycle. And we're down in the 80s, which goes right along with several others' work that was saying we're going to be stepping down and it is going to be noticeable. It's great that they're saying that it could be, but there's always this could, maybe, might in behind it. But if you look at the forecasts in CISLO, it's not remotely where it was, say, 3 years ago when they were forecasting the intensity of it. So again, I can run with a moving by the month forecast and keep changing the numbers too, but how realistic are they going to be, or how close are they? See, I tried to put my forecast in back at the beginning of the solar cycle to say, hey, David Dubine, Adapt 2030, I'm saying 50 to 70 sunspots average, because I was following John Casey's work and we had a chance to talk a bit. I wanted to put my forecast in there. Make me look like an idiot if I get it so wrong, and then you can discount anything I have to say. They would not allow me to put my forecast in there, even though I had the channel, even though I was talking about space weather, different effects of the sun on our climate, on agriculture. They would not let me put the forecast in. They're only institutions can do that. I'm like, wait a second. We have a disconnect here of why am I not allowed as a citizen who's also studying solar cycles to be able to put the forecast out there? Is it such a limited club that only the people that are running a observatory are allowed to put out sunspot forecasts? So far, they've been 20% off the mark of what it was 3 years ago. So as we move forward, I'm really curious where it's going to end up, and will they retract at the end? And each month or each 2 months, they're allowed to do an update, by the way, of where the next forecast will be moving down through the cycle. It's not as if you make the forecast and it's stuck in stone and solidifies in concrete of what they said 3 years ago. It's a moving target and an update as they continue to move through the months. So if anybody out there wants to do the research, please go back 3 years and find out what they were saying about the absurdly high 120 to 130 average sunspots compared to where we sit now at around 80. And you'll see that big discontinuity between the forecast and what was said. So many other people also say, as this one tapers off, we are absolutely going into what we saw in the mid 1600s. And that's only a couple of years from now as well. It's great that it might shift a little bit off of a quarter of a sun cycle, but everybody at the end of this has, even NOAA has sunspots average over solar cycle 26, which is a few years away. So the deflection, again, I don't understand what it is, how this, in the media, the enormous amount of media that pushes the same narrative, the same message out. Oh, it's higher than normal. It's higher than normal. It's higher than normal. But then what happened when NOAA's forecast comes out and says, yeah, we're going to have 6 sunspots this next solar cycle. Wait, there's going to be 3 in some months during the next solar cycle. Wait a second. That's a huge disconnect. Solar cycle 26 also, we're going to ramp up. It took much longer for this sunspot cycle to kick off than they anticipated. It was at least a year and a half, maybe a year and 7 months longer to kick off that last solar minimum to start this cycle as well, which was something that was anomalous that really not a lot of people want to talk about. So that's where I was splitting the hair on that particular forecast.
Right. And I appreciate that. So I think it might have been a couple of months ago, but it seemed to have been announced just like yesterday or the day before that China put up some kind of sun. I don't know what they mean by that. I don't know if you heard that. I don't know if this is related to what you're talking about. Like, is it possible that they're anticipating this solar minimum, and so they think they're going to alter it by putting up some kind of sun type object? Is that not even related in any way? And is it, some false front for a satellite or a, platform or something?
I haven't heard them. I heard a fair few months ago about some sort of artificial device to magnify sunlight and push it down, but that's all I've really heard about it. But China, through the last, say, 3,000 years, has the greatest records through the Silk Road, because they had the Maritime Silk Road all the way over to Africa, and the Northern Silk Road that went through the deserts and the basins that we understand, and through Kazakhstan and all these things all the way over to Europe. they understand the solar cycles really well. And each of these grand solar minimums, the Chinese emperors have collapsed. They've never held it. Again, nice factoid to throw around. No Chinese dynasty has ever lasted longer than 400 years. Gee, that's the same amount of time that a grand solar minimum recurs again. And if you read the history of China, it's about the collapse. It's about the mandate from heaven was removed from the emperor because he could not feed the people. So something had changed in the weather patterns there. But again, with the superstitions 3,000 years ago, et cetera, it was all about the jet streams moved, the rains came in the wrong times, the temperatures were really low, floods and epic floods like we've seen in China for the last 2 years. So China seems to have a repeat, and how the Chinese government's going to control it is a little bit different because we have global shipping now. So they were putting out all these new Silk Roads to try to get supplies from other areas of the world, specifically in North Africa, where they're trying to bring on a new growing area and then ship that all the way back through military control of those string of pearls. Each one of those is a military base all the way around the Indian Ocean and then back to China. And also with Kazakhstan is a huge one to look at because the railroad lines that connect from China to Europe and that new Belt and Road Initiative all go through Kazakhstan. So if you were to take that away, then China loses its northern routes of food delivery, fuel deliveries, grain shipment deliveries that they were counting on, especially the rare earth minerals and uranium, et cetera. So China knows what's happening, and you see how they've positioned themselves for the last 10 years to really get ready, I should say 15, to go out on the world and get ready to deliver as much as they can and set up all these routes for delivery. We didn't have that in the 1600s, 1640s, 1650s. We're in a new era. It's just a little bit different right now, but I see a lot of things repeating in history too. Okay,
but what about weather wars? You must be aware of the climate manipulation. This is major as far as I'm concerned, and indeed, there's reason to believe that we never have natural weather anymore here on Earth. So, the fires are also man-made. I mean, there's so many elements of this that are going into this, painting a picture of the future that is, again, engineered, keeping the container ships off the coast, not unloading them, not allowing distribution even right now, let alone, so starting to shut down the distribution lines and et cetera. So how do you factor that into your theories and plans?
Two different levels of the same program.
Mm-hmm.
So cosmic radiation management is one, and then what we know is stratospheric aerosol geoengineering is the second. Now, when I look at Lake Tahoe getting 50 feet of snow, 50 feet, and then Washington State getting so much snow that their passes are cut off where highways are impassable in a single storm. Something's engineered there as well. You can't tell me naturally that much snow has come down. That is a fully engineered event, in my opinion, as well. These arc storms, the way they keep getting directed into Northern California, Oregon, Washington, British Columbia, again, and these record cold temperatures in British Columbia that are 20 below zero, that is unheard of there. And the amount of snowfall and that port that got completely wiped out in the floods. If you were to put enough nuclei up there and drop rain in those same areas, because if you look at Vancouver Port, that went offline as well, because once in a 500 or once in 1,000, some people say once in a 3,000 year rain event. But then if you look at 50 feet of snow in Tahoe, that's got to be stretching on the once in a 500, once in an 800 year, once in 1,000 year event too. And then it happened in Washington, and those blistering cold temperatures, it seems like it's all being directed, the atmosphere being pushed in there, and somehow the coupling at the same time with the cold air to make these two masses hit and flow on top of each other. And if you want to cut a country off, you could definitely do it just continuously. But then we saw the same thing in China, where they had never-ending floods for 2 years in a row during the growth season, where they lost an enormous amount of crops. Now they're dependent on the rest of the world. Weather warfare, what's that, owning the skies? That's 2025. That's just 2 years from now. Now, the cosmic radiation management, this goes back a couple of years ago. And Heinrich Svensmark is who you want to look for. Heinrich Svensmark. He was doing a lot of research before CERN picked up on the same research and then verified that, yes, cosmic rays do create more clouds. So now they're finding that cosmic ray increases, which is an inverse of a strength of the solar activity in the sun. The more the sun steps down and goes into low activity, the more cosmic rays come into our planet. That's just on a regular 11-year cycle. But when you go into an incredible multi-century low, you're going to get a lot more cosmic rays. Well, they're finding that there's 7x more input of cloud layer building during these cosmic ray increase times, which is now and going to go through the next couple of decades. And it's forming a new cloud layer, 18,000 to 23,000 feet approximately. So think about the mechanisms here. You're talking about the weather and what they're doing with aerosol engineering up there, geoengineering, particle disbursement. Those metals nullify the charge of a cosmic ray coming in. When they hit it, they lose their charge and they don't build a cloud. On the inverse, those clouds coming, or the cosmic rays coming in, are building new cloud layers. So if our Earth's magnetic field is in flux as it is, it's shifting. People's hemispheres of their brain are perceiving that. That's why they're behaving a little strangely, looking at things differently, freaking out sometimes when the Schumann resonance is super high, the KP index is incredibly low, and then our magnetic field. But this new cloud layer in there, if you think the jet streams and the cloud cells are moving into different positions anyway because our magnetosphere is weakening, and then you add a whole nother cloud band in there, the entire atmosphere is fighting for new positions. That's why you're seeing this equatorial vortex start to form too, where the equatorial band winds usually stay where they are, but they're being pushed incredibly far north, just like the Arctic vortex is pushing really far south, even Cuba, these areas. So there is absolutely, in my opinion, man-made input into the whole system. Now we got another cloud layer forming from natural causes, cosmic rays.
Okay, when you form a cloud layer, that just sounds kind of benign. Are you talking about, because you can have still a lot of light be getting through, right? So plants can grow. But if the clouds then form storms or tornadoes or this or that, is that what you're looking at? Are you expecting that the increased cosmic rays or whatever are going to cause more storms? And does that work, or is there something else going on? Or do they just sit there? I mean, what are you saying about this cloud layer?
The jet streams and the cloud cells are the huge drivers of the climate from 0 degrees north to 30 degrees north. The famous one would be like the Hadley cell. And then from 30 degrees to 60 degrees north, there's another one. And then from 60 to up to the Arctic Circle, or vice versa down to Antarctica, we have these 6 layers that go across the planet. Now within there, the jet streams are moving under that within it. And then we're going to build another little layer on top. So another indication that this would be is the airlines that keep getting forced down because of the massive hail events with the most technologically advanced radar can't get around the storm systems because they're too thick in the sheeting. This is an exact, I mean, that could be an identical textbook definition of increased cloud layering with updrafts coming through it that are causing more intense storms. Now, I'm not going to say the tornadoes, although that event that went through Kentucky, the entire atmosphere is compressed downward, and created that vortice, which is interesting. How does something compress the atmosphere from 60,000 feet to 40,000 feet and squish it down? Literally squeeze it down to near the Earth's surface under 10,000 feet from up that high. What caused that? But the hail events forcing down these flights on emergency flights. You should look how many there are of just windshields peppered with giant hail, and the size of the hailstones too. I mean, we're getting record hail almost every week now come across different places. These are indicators that second cloud layer is up there. It's causing different updrafting. Now the tornadoes I can't really speak to, the vortice winds, but just a sheer amount of precipitation and updrafting that allows more nuclei, ice particles, and ice formation. Hail, yes.
Okay, so to move to this idea of the distribution of food being, the supply chain being interrupted. Can you address this from your perspective, though, with all these elements involved?
I don't think it's organic. I think it's planned just as you do. There's too many moving pieces that are being halted or put in no motion on purpose. You can't tell me all those ships are sitting off there, off the coast of California, with all the base chemicals to create the fertilizers and the herbicides that we need to plant and get a yield out of the fields in America. This is national security at its highest level. If you can't grow enough food to feed the people, or if there's reduced amounts of food, you're going to go into, there's 800 raw food storage warehouses in America. They're pulling out 40% more than they usually do per month now. And the replenishment rate,
I'm sorry. I just want to stop you. What does pulling out mean? What do you mean by pulling out?
The drawdowns of the food to move out of those storage facilities to get out into the broader market. So overall, there's 137,000 participant stores like Walmart and Sam's Club and Costco and a lot of other smaller ones that are across the United States. So there's 800 of these regional warehouses that are stationed across the different states. And if something goes into a short supply, they try to pull out of there to deliver to these others to alleviate shortages. It's kind of like the strategic oil reserve, but it's for the food supply.
Okay.
And the drawdown or the pull out to go to the stores to try to make it not look like there's a food shortage, they're increasing the rate of what would be pulled out each month by 40%. The problem is what's being put back in to fill back up the stocks is really slowed down between, I think they're at a 5 to 8, maybe 10% input rate to refill that. So it doesn't take a genius to realize that if you pull something out 40% faster and you're only replenishing it at 5% or 10%, at some point it's going to go to zero, like your bathtub. If the water's trickling in, drip, 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 but you have the tub unplugged completely and it's flowing out of there, it's eventually going to run out. This is the same thing. And it's all supply chain based. I just don't know why the fertilizers are not there because of natural gas. We're looking at a lot of mandates of Biden cutting off the pipelines, natural gas pipelines, but that's a major, major constituent to manufacturing fertilizer. And the ammonia plant, again, I'll go back to the geoengineering. That hurricane that hit Louisiana, that I went right over the United States' largest ammonia production plant. And that has been offline. They had increased production and capacity to bring more fertilizer online to try to get away from China's stranglehold, to get our own fertilizer in our own United States again, built up like we used to. We used to produce our own fertilizer. But then suddenly, wham, that it was a refinery and an ammonia producer as well. Hasn't come back up. So we're down on the ammonia, we're down on the natural gas. The potash, well, we produce it. Now here's another thing. Canada has a lot of potash. So what's not going to be delivered into Washington and Oregon? What's not going to be delivered up into Idaho? What's not going to be delivered into Minnesota? Who would make the vax mandate that you can't drive needed supplies across the border when trucking was essential anyway in the beginning of it? And now suddenly it's not essential to bring goods that keep our industrial complex moving forward in terms of agribiz. And I'm not a fan. I'm going to say it. I'm not a fan of the glyphosate. I'm not a fan of the incredible chemical mixes that they use and the damage that they've done to the soils. I'm not a fan. But the way it is now, they've gone so far down the rabbit hole on that, we can't really come back. We can't go organic. All the manure has been spoken for pretty much across the entire United States. There's barely any out there. And if the entire agribiz needs to supplement a percentage going into manures instead of chemical fertilizers, that's just not doable. So then, you're hitting it on the head there. Something is being planned in the supply chain to knock the knees out of agricultural production in America.
Here we are. You're looking, and let's say you're correct in the your evaluation, your critique of what's really going on out there. What is your solution? What are you advising people to do?
If you can go to a farm co-op store and get bags of fertilizer now, you are absolutely, like our grandparents did, going to have to start victory gardens. This is going to be a thing by the end of the year. Organizing with people who have some of the same self-interest that you do of being more self-sufficient, getting the gardens up. I know it's really cold in a lot of places, but here in Tennessee next month, we're going to be warm enough to start getting the initial gardens ready to plant. You got to find people of like mind that are going to want to work together. And the supplies that you can get now, get them, because things are not going to rise in price a little bit. These fertilizer prices, I was talking to the co-op guys down there because I have a registered farm, have already doubled. And that's on the wholesale level for people who are buying like 200 tons at a time minimum. They won't even talk to you if you don't buy 200 tons. That's already more than doubled in price on that level. So when you knock it down to like the 5-pound bag or the 10-pound bag that our average gardener might get, they're looking at 5-8 times increase in the prices. And that's going to go across the board for everything. Herbicides, which I don't like to use. I like to keep my place more natural, soap and water if I can, for beetles and things. But a lot of people that are first-time gardeners aren't going to be able to control the pests. You're going to have to learn the pests that are in your area and think about how to control those without using chemical the best you can, and do a little research. But the whole thing is going to be coming down to community and getting the supplies that are going to go short first. And then if you have the funds, get some more food in advance, because the prices are going to get not crazy, but absurd and astronomical. And I really think, Kerry, by the end of the year here, there's going to be rationing. And I think the ration card's going to be tied to your COVID pass. And that might even be tied to your entry into the store, like it is in Europe and Australia and so many other places, Austria, Canada as well. They won't even let you go into a farmer's market without it. So where does that leave us? Okay, we see all these things happening. You're going to need to get with people who are of like mind and get your supplies now before they start to get super thin, unavailable. And at the rate it's going, I'm trying to put a timeline together, and I'm hoping that, Kerry, you have a little more deeper insight into how people's psychology is changing right now with what we're seeing. And you're going to have to protect your food too. And anybody who's never raised chickens before, please start. Find your Amish markets. If you know any Amish around your area, go out and know your farmers. If they offer anything at their farms, learn where they are. Get a full-on database list of everybody who's selling food directly from the farm to the consumer. Cut out that farmer's market, cut out anything in the middle. You need to go direct, and you need to get off the supply chains, because those are the things that are going to constrict further. There's going to be more and more and more draconian rules to access those same supply chains. Distant early warning, this is the year, I do believe. So, Kerry, I want to ask you a question then. Like, you've been talking to a lot of people recently. What's their feeling of how the perception of these narratives breaking down across the entire newscape is happening? Because this is going to go lockstep with the awareness, the understanding. And once Mama Bear out there, the mothers of the world, get it, that the inputs for farming aren't going to be there and their prices are going to run away, they're going to be a major part of the society, a demographic that's going to really shift a lot more, demand action. And I don't know how governments are going to respond. But are people waking up, in your opinion, to the plight that we're in now for all this beyond the COVID, for the supply chain breakdowns and the awakenings happening with magnetic field anomalies?
Well, I definitely think that people are, even people that, are, it's not like a vaxxed or a non-vaxxed. This is a different area, right? Supply chain, the rumors about supply chain shutdowns have even, reached the mainstream. So I think people are starting to think along those lines. I know a lot of people are thinking of growing their own food. I mean, that's another aspect of this, right? So, but I don't know, I don't know how successful that is. I don't know going forward if there are limitations in that. I understand like certain limitations could already be built in, like seeds, right? And then you're saying fertilizer. I don't know a lot about it, but you need fertilizer no matter what kind of garden you have. Is that correct? Or is it just limited to certain kind of garden, because we're talking, there's different levels. We're talking an individual or small family with a small plot of land that's not necessarily going to share with their neighbors, but just do for themselves, that kind of thing. And then you've got larger, situations where, like, I think you have some land, people do have land and might be thinking of getting together in groups.
The word anhydrous will become a very common word, like social distancing. anhydrous, urea, potash. These will be like water cooler talk words that'll suddenly pop out of nowhere.
What is hydro? What does that mean?
Oh, these are just different fertilizer types that
Oh.
allow higher yields. So CF Industries, which is one of the largest fertilizer manufacturers in the United States, their CEO came out publicly on the record and said, globally, we're looking for around a 12% reduction in fertilizer. So I've been asking a lot of people who are far more, professional at greenhouse indoor growing, regular farmers around here, and a 12% reduction in fertilizer pretty much equals a 12% reduction in output. Okay, that's an easy 1-to-1 ratio. Then the herbicide shortages are coming in. Again, I just cannot believe that these are all happening at the same time. Otherwise, it's planned. And the thing is about these herbicides, and again, I want to say and state this first, I am not a fan of glyphosate at all in any way, shape, or form. It's been known to cause cancer. There's so many lawsuits against the makers of this, and I can't believe it's still allowed to be used on our crops. Now, it's the only thing that'll really hit grass in between the rows of corn. You can use, if you try to use a broadleaf herbicide, which broadleaf is just the plants that grow up, the weeds. I think it's wild edibles myself. You could wild forage and get some food out of that. Some people term them as weeds. If they want to grow a monocrop and something else pops up, it's a weed. But for me, a lot of those, I'm looking around going, wait, that's a leafy vegetable right there. I can eat that. Yeah, maybe another thing. If you can learn how to wild forage or at least identify the edible species around that grow wild, you got the forest is your supermarket. So with these herbicides, the rows between the corn mainly have grass in the emergent stage. Well, if they don't have the Roundup, two things happen. First, the grasses just take over the field and they can grow equally as fast or even faster than the corn and kind of stunt the growth. They're trying to get the same nutrients that were being put on for the corn. They're looking at, 9 bushels per acre minimum at the decline yield if there's grasses in between the rows. Secondly, the Roundup Ready GMO species, as they're planting it, they put the fertilizer behind, and at the same time, they put the Roundup, and then it kills all the weeds pre-emergence, just before the seed breaks, and then it starts to come up. So they eliminate any competition at all. Not even one weed is usually out there to interfere with the production of, I'm going to use corn as the example because I know a lot about that one. So these grasses are going to be in there.
Is GMO. I mean,
so much of it, over 60% in the state.
Yeah. So why would you even look at that? And how does that, are you just trying to talk about producers, like massive producers? That's really who you're talking to right now, because I can't see, even families, I don't see them using these herbicides.
Oh, no, they won't. You're correct. The reason I'm trying to frame this is 60% of everything grown in America is GMO. So you're right. You need those 100,000 acre producers. Those are the ones that sell to General Mills. Those are the ones that sell to XYZ grain mill that'll push it on to any of these companies that'll produce food to put it in the supermarkets. Incredible decline in the yield means there's not enough to go into the mills, and then there'll be a bidding war on that. So when you start to see that, wow, even the things that prevent weeds from going in are going to knock more off of that. So you got a 12% decline because not enough fertilizer. And then you're looking at knocking another percentage off of the yield per acre just because they don't have the herbicides to compete with the plants. Then where does that leave us? If it's not there, it's going to be even lower yields on these cornfields coming in. So at the broader spectrum on the large producers, and I'm not talking about me and you, they're out there at 100,000 acres. What if they only get a 50% emergence? Then what? See, this is where it starts to cascade down into the average supermarket buyer. So all those inputs into getting that just to come up are not there either. So you start to do the math on this and you're going, that's a lot of crop losses. Now, and it's in Europe, it's the same. Australia, it's the same. Canada, it is exactly the same. And then we got the United States and then Russia. They're not going to be selling much. They're cutting off their exports of wheat. Kazakhstan, 10 million tons of wheat that won't be there. I don't know how their planting season's going to go this year. They're politically, again, that whole rail thing and the extra swing producing out of that supplies China. China swoops up that 10 million tons out of Kazakhstan every year. There's a lot of geopolitical things in Ukraine. That's the largest wheat basket in Europe. And who's fighting over that? See, it's all about the food now. And I'll point to the food. A lot of this geopolitics is related to the placement of food, who controls the food growing zones.
Right.
And these crop losses are going into is huge, really huge.
Okay. All right. So in other words, what we may be seeing, even with these sort of talk of war and all that, what's really being divvied up is control of the food.
The top growing spots on the planet.
Because they have an agenda, they're trying to meet. So that you just named two places that are under, duress with respect to Russia and supposedly NATO, fighting over them or whatever. And they're both, I guess, big producers of food, right? So is this being engineered in order to allow the Chinese to come in to somewhere like Kazakhstan and take greater control along with Russia? So, or is it, are they trying to kick the Chinese out or make it so it just doesn't, as you say, doesn't produce? That could be also an agenda, right? If China's going to be more dependent on the US as a result or somewhere else than Kazakhstan, suddenly you've got a geopolitical tightrope that's being walked that has a way of controlling the way that China approaches the next year or two, right? If they're having to pull back because they can't feed their people without bowing down to areas controlled by either Europe or the United States, something like that. This is just hypothetical thinking, but tell me, is this what you're talking about? Is this in theory where we could be going? And you said, so Ukraine is like this incredible breadbasket, but has that been interfered with over the last few years? Because Ukraine has been in and out of warlike situations now for years. Has that cut back on their production? Or do you know? I mean, these might be off your topic. I don't really know.
They've dropped production, and it's finally ramping back up to where it was prior to 5 years ago. People can start to see, wow, that is a huge producer now. If we go to China for a moment, and pretty much the world, there's going to be no street protests in China about food. Now, food is the thing. People can argue about politics and, my economy is bad and I don't like my government and I want change. I want freedom of speech. Okay, I get it. I really do. But when it comes to food, that's the thing that people will walk in front of machine guns for because they have nothing left to lose. Their families are starving. So how would you prevent that? I mean, China is the most totalitarian place with a known track record of mass famine during these events. And you see this excuse of COVID, what they're doing on so many cities now, Xi'an, they're just like it was in Wuhan. They would just weld people in their buildings and come back with the body cleaning crews later. Oh, everybody's starved. Who cares? We still got 4.5 billion over. Okay, no, we need to knock that number down. So why is it across China? All these things are happening at this very moment to lock people down. Huge amounts of public campaigns of clean your plate. If you order, you can't order more than one dish per person in a restaurant. Well, now all the restaurants are closed. So you can only go at home and cook. It's a more efficient way to save food. I think we've kind of run that course of getting everybody home, knocking out all the restaurants, because the food wastage, you got to think about in the food and bev industry. If we go off to different kind of meeting venues and catering, this sort of thing, there was a huge amount of food wastage. I think up to 40%, 40% was wasted of all the food that was in convention centers, universities, restaurants. So as a planner, you would look out and go, what's the first way we can knock all that down, remove that 40% wastage and get people home so they start cooking at home and there's more food to stretch for another couple of years so we can keep playing out the game so nobody will see it. Oh, now it's gone from that to they're locking people in their houses. China's a huge one here. Like they understand through their history that they collapse every one of these events. So being reliant on the United States, on one of your enemies, is not such a good thing. Although the terrifying part of history is anybody will sell the food and let their own countrymen starve. If you look at the Great Potato Famine that we saw in Ireland, they would export the food past the starving people on the road and have the military shoot them if they got in the way of the wagons leaving. And people were starving to death in that country, and they were still exporting the food. Yeah, that is a lot of people want to talk about that. And the most dangerous, and then we'll roll you back a couple hundred years prior in the 1650s, the most dangerous position for an English soldier was guarding the grain shipments from the fields into the cities, because they were attacked 100% of the time, 100%, because they saw the same thing. Okay, we're out here growing this food, and you, monarchy, come in and steal our food, and you're going to leave us out here with not much. Well, what's going on? Okay, we got nothing left to lose, except you were going to fight every single time. Well, China gets it too. That's what they always did. How do you think the emperors got overthrown? So now there's this ready-made excuse to lock the entire planet down, control them with the police state in place, and anytime it comes down to it, citizens versus army, citizens versus police, there's already a ready-made task force to get in there to stop and quell the unrest. It will spill to the streets, no doubt. But for right now, there's still some international trade going on, and who's reliant on who? Because if you're a country and you need more food, I would look at an area, and I'm going to go a little woo-woo here. I would look at an area that's not being grown as a crop growing zone right now, but that could be the world's largest breadbasket, almost doubling what America and Canada are combined. And I would look at that and say, where is that place? North Africa. Now, you have to put a couple factors here. First, the West African monsoon is shifting. It's been shifting for 30 years or so, but now it's in earnest, dropping an enormous amount of more rainfall from West Africa heading all the way into the Sahel. Now, that's a natural pattern. That's a once in a 4,000-year shift, and it's starting to shift again. So you start to look out at these longer cycles of climate versus 70 or 40 years of this satellite data, or 120 years or 150 years. Now we're talking about 4,000-year cycles here starting to repeat. So the natural rainfall is really increasing off the Western African peninsulas, rolling all the way into the Sahel. But at the same time, in the Indian Ocean, if you've been paying attention, there's massive floods across Oman, Saudi Arabia. The driest places in the world are getting flooded from cyclone after cyclone after cyclone. And somebody with the magic crystal ball put the Africa's largest hydroelectric dam in the driest place in Africa, in Eritrea in Sudan, and scratched their head and said, rain gods, please fill it up. And you know what? It was supposed to take 7 years to fill that thing, and it filled in 2. So all these extra storms, there we go, geoengineering again. So who would put a hydroelectric dam in the driest place and then fill it in 2 years? Then you look at it and you say, Nubian sandstone aquifer, it's the most underground water resource across the planet. Now, if you could tap that, bring up that water from under the ground, brand new water, brand new. There's some primary water sources there too. But Nubian sandstone aquifer, this is the aquifer that runs under all of North Africa. So now you have increasing precipitation above ground, and then the West African monsoon shifting, blowing in an enormous amount of rain all the way from Chad into Niger and these different areas. And then you tap the underground water resources. You got the above ground water resources increasing from natural shifts in cycle. Problem is, there's a lot of people there. There were a lot of people there. Man, this mass migration thing to get 10 million men of fighting age off of that and out into the continent in Europe. Now there's no resistance there. You could just go in and set up a new grow zone. And this is what I think the ultimate plan was for this migration out of Africa into Europe, to get all the resistance fighting age men out of there and set up the new world's grow zone in there. You're getting double crops, double rotated crops, some of the cleanest water on the planet to grow those crops with. And with new energy devices, if you're looking at magnetic motors, Parendev magnetic motors, and a huge amount of other tech that's about to be
fascinating. Sorry about that. You
could really, if you had magnetic motors to power that, you would not even need to put a grid out. You could individually install those magnetic motors across the areas for the pumping that you would need and the distribution.
Okay, but do you think that what's happening in Africa, because we also hear about Chinese, building cities in Africa and so on and so forth. Yeah, do you think that that's also part of that game?
Oh, absolutely. They built the ports along the East Coast to try to bring the grains by rail from those mid areas in Chad Now, if you look out in Chad, if anybody has Earth Viewer and a NASA Earth Viewer, go down into central Chad and you'll start to see a bunch of 100-mile by 100-mile squares that are right there where the dry area terminates, but it's getting wetter. And if you can look at the vegetation index and see how the satellites are picking up the new vegetation growing year by year, you'll easily see those 100 by 100 square mile squares. That's China out there growing using the water from under the desert. And then they export, they take it by rail and take it out in Kenya and then across their string of pearls. And then Gwadar is the next one over in Pakistan. And they go around India and then they unload again. Where is in Myanmar, Jakpu port. And see, this is how I knew about this whole thing because I was working in Myanmar doing the coffee. I never would have known about Jakpu port and that little tiny stretch of railroad. Instead of going all the way around through the Malacca Straits to get your stuff back to China, they would unload in Jakpu port, which is the largest oil unloading terminal, by the way. And it's only a couple 100 miles across that to get into Yunnan province over, and Kunming is the capital of that. So you bypass the entire American stranglehold and it's a much shorter trip also. So you grow the food in Africa, you bring it on your militarized string of pearls and you drop it off in Myanmar and you send it by rail a couple 100 miles and it ends up in Western China. You know, there's a lot going on here. And before, maybe in the 1950s, it was all about oil. And we all know that. We could read a lot of books on how the world was controlled. Oil with the Rockefellers, probably going back in the 1920s and 10s, central banking. But now it's going to be about the food. So the central banks in 1913, then it was all about the oil and the control of the world using oil as the mechanism for all these wars and things and setting up. But look, it's shifting over to food now. And they don't want a lot of people on the planet. If they knock the population down by half, we wouldn't have these problems and all these grow zones would be put out without much resistance.
Yes, I see some good signs, but I also see some, just insane signs of just not getting a grip and not listening to the real science and being completely diluted by all of it. So when you throw these shortages, sorry, go ahead.
Well, how do you break through that? Because so many people are into that narrative of even if you present alternative information that's 180 degrees, what happens to the average person on the ground that's just getting tennised all over the place? Bing, bing, new information, contradictory information.
Well, I think,
but they won't step out of it.
The fear. See, this idea of fear is addictive. Fear is driving almost everything that's going on right now in terms of what decisions people are making is based on fear. And it's fear of scarcity, fear of that they themselves are not in command of their world, that someone else has to come and pat them on the head, take care of them, do this or that for them. It's always externalizing the responsibility off of the person themselves and, taking responsibility for your family and your own health and so on and so forth. So I think that, and that's like a snowball. So fear in a way is like a snowball. And in certain communities, it definitely, gets traction and like rolls down the hill, right? And gets bigger and bigger as it goes down. So there's that aspect. Then, of course, you've got the people like us who basically have said no, planted our feet in the ground and said, absolutely not. And that may come to a head in the midst of this other engineered weather war situation, and then the scarcity in terms of food and access. So, I mean, it's a petri dish full of planned, devolutionary plans that are based on eliminating population of. If you eliminate the fear, you're never going to have these problems because people will take action. They won't see fear as being an impediment. Right now, if you have fear, you have an impediment to action of any kind. But in terms of your expertise, and if people were going to, follow your work and go to your website, what would you say to them that you are going to provide for them? Are you giving them guidance so they need to read the book or follow certain information on your website, or what is your offering there?
Just to put the information out for people, families, and communities to get more ready. So in the videos that I do on Adapt 2030 on YouTube, I try to put something in there about you can build your own soils. You can build your own fertilizers by using compost. You can create your own compost. You don't have to rely on companies to buy that. But, that takes a little bit of time to do it, and you can absolutely do all that. But if somebody's going to start a garden from scratch out of their backyard and they walk over there and go, we're going to plant a stake here and here, we're going to cut this triangle or rectangle out, there's going to be almost no nutrition in there. So they're going to have to build the soils. So, even getting what we consider victory gardens, if you were going to do it the natural way, that would take a couple of years to get the planting, get the dirt churned up, and then start adding natural adjuvants in there, breaking down leaves and different kind of compost and what would be, dinner scraps. And there's an enormous amount of things you could use for the composting piles to get your soils built out, the mycorrhiza and all these things in a natural fashion. We just don't have that time anymore because it's going to happen so fast. But realize while it's happening, you can still do that natural preparation. So eventually those two are going to pair up and you'll be self-sufficient at the time. It's about getting the starts in now. That book needs to be updated. I wrote that in 2019, and there's so much new information about the second magnetic field coupling. I really believe it needs to be updated.
Right.
I try to do more work on the podcast, but as the sun swings around and gets more locked in here around, say, March and April. So I'm starting to think there's a second set of lockstep here going with the control mechanisms. So a couple of things to look for, I would say no later than May. You're going to see a lot of earth rifting, unexplainable pipe breaks, railroad track rippings, fiber optic cable snappings, and different things that make no sense because it's riding on the top of the Earth's crust. So as the planet swings around, it's going to really be 100% locked in that field, not at the full intensity of October 2024, but it's going to be in the field 100% coming up from April this year. So we're going to see a lot more weather disturbances. The electromagnetic field on the planet is going to start to react with that second toroidal field. We're going to get two looping magnetic fields coming in. So the sun will be one, and after it reaches its solar max next year, year after, a year and a half, say 12 or 16 months or so, it'll start to go right back down, and it's going to drop off a cliff off solar activity. So that's step down. Then we'll have a second magnetic field, a coupling of Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune. Their magnetic fields are going to combine into one magnetic field. It's the closest they can get at their trajectories in the solar system that those looping fields can create that toroid that will then envelop into the Earth. Because you got to think Jupiter, what's the next planet in from Jupiter? Mars. So we're 2 planets away from that second magnetic field, and we're 3 planets away from the main magnetic field. Now, it's not very often that this happens, but if you have planetary geometry, solar system scope, JPL, universal sandbox, whatever you like to use, trace those planets back to 79 AD and see how they do that square formation, very tight in one quadrant of the solar system. That's that looping magnetic field. It's going to create its own field that's going to loop in on top of our own Earth here. We're going to get into that April, May of this year. And it's just going to get more intense from that. And as it swings around the sun each time, I believe other people know the cycle with deeper information that's hidden from a lot of us. How would they get that information? Well, they did run around the planet for 500 years pillaging. A lot of those ancient texts and codices and understanding of these cycles, energetic areas in space where we're transiting, are kept from the general public. And there's going to be some effects with that too coming up. And that's what I really would like to update in the book, is this second magnetic field and how through history it's been described and the awakenings that go on with this. And, if I was a political elite, which I'm not, and at that top echelon of 0.001% of those controllers of the planet, I would not want people waking up and utilizing their innate abilities to overthrow my power. But I really absolutely 1,000% believe that this second magnetic field coupling is the trigger for what I would consider a mass awakening. Now, it's not going to be an instant event and go, well, everybody's awake. It'll be the beginning of the transition into the cycle. But as it happens, what we consider this top-down pyramidal structure can no longer hold state. It's going to be vibrating too fast. So how would you stop people from awakening and understanding what that magnetic field is doing to them? Now, it's just going to be the beginning of the cycle. It's not going to be an instant thing like whoosh, everybody suddenly, superpowers, and we can overthrow this and we can change the whole system and we can vibrate them out of this dimensional space. And it's going to be the beginning of that cycle, just like the beginning of this cycle that we're seeing with this transition all the way through population, new food growing areas, this grand solar minimum, onset of new food areas. We're going to have to map out new areas in the world where there's different precipitation and then match the crops to that and start moving through this as well. So we have kind of two different cycles that are overlapping, and it is the beginning of these cycles moving through. So you can see why there's so much control over humanity right now. This is definitely a control over your thought, your awakening, and how your perception of reality is being controlled, because with this second magnet, your brain is magnetic. The hemispheres of your brain are magnetic. If our magnetosphere of the entire planet changes, how do you think we're going to change? The sun stepping down into a very low activity, not seen in 400 or 2,000 years, in low electrical activity. Beginning May of this year, there'll be a lot more people. They'll just behave they'll understand things differently. And October of 2024 is going to be the main absolute maximum impact of that second Torrid magnetic field. October of 2024.
Right before the 2024 election. So these things that could be considered even distractions to maybe the real game in town, that's perhaps what one has to do is to start analyzing that for oneself and so on. But I appreciate everything you said today. I think it's very important, and I think that it really needs closer look to determine where we're going to be at. So it'd be great if you would come back.
I would like that, because then we'll have much better numbers. And when I say me, the people I talk with and people who analyze that type of crop data, and where we're going to sit with the actual amount of XYZ farm input.
If it's all about food, but I understand it's also about water, right? So food and water in the future, those are it may be much more important than gold. I mean, not gold, but although gold is one thing, but, oil and gas. So what are we looking at there? See, oil and gas are really important for the northern hemisphere, right? In the winter, right? Then in the summer, I'm thinking, yeah.
Absolutely.
And vice versa for when the southern hemisphere goes into winter. So that's kind of an interesting dynamic as well. And also, what are these container chips really doing sitting there? What in the world do they contain or not contain? And how many are out there? And, what's the status on all of that? Because I haven't heard anything about it actually in quite a while now.
Yeah, nor I. It was on the radar for a while, no pun intended. But then it just disappeared. There's shortage, and now people have kind of become accustomed to the shortages. But my whole thing is, as the food shortages amplify, there's going to be these geopolitical events to explain away why the food is not making it to the stores. There's going to have to be some sort of balance on excuse, narrative, whatever you want to call it, and the reason for non-deliverables into these things that we walk into every day to get the things that keep us alive. You can't just have a store run completely empty with no excuse behind it. Now, knowing what I'm talking about and the food production going to absurdly minimal levels this year, that would shake the markets, shake the confidence of the average person in being able to get food. Well, there's going to be that inverse of the people are going to go to the streets when that happens, and they might overthrow governments when that happens. So maybe we need a distraction, a war, or something else to explain away why this is happening. So I'm looking at it from the interplanetary magnetic field every time that steps down and there's a greater influence of electromagnetism on our planet and shifting the jet streams and knocking out those plant and harvest dates, there seems to be a very good correlation on moves of what's happening on this planet with control of movement of people, and then access to goods at the moment keeps amplifying.
You know what, these things work together. And my understanding, this is directly tied into the monetary system, which we haven't talked much about, but is absolutely, integral to everything we're discussing here. And what kind of shutdowns, are they going to put in place there? These things are interwoven. And I think maybe you've demonstrated that very well during this conversation. And that's good. That's helpful, I think.
Yeah, thanks. I'll leave off with one thought about the economy. Now, to replace something that we know as fiat currencies, they have an asset value associated with them. So they're going to have to come up with a completely new asset base that has value to replace that with.
Right.
So cryptocurrency could be one of the pillars. And you're looking at the carbon trading market, the carbon allocation market, and then the personal carbon allocations, which they're going to give you. And if you don't have enough, you can go onto the open carbon market and buy something. So then you could purchase what you want, because it could take 10 carbon credits because I bought this camera here, but I only have 9 in my account. So I need to buy one more from the open market. So the carbon market itself is going to be another pillar of that. You got the cryptocurrency, gold and silver, precious metals, which you mentioned, of course. And then one thing that is not really widely talked about here is the valuation. Is called an eco-valuation, where they will take areas of the planet and they're going to lock them off and put a valuation on it first, on the lumber, on the timber, but those are going to be no-go zones. You're not allowed in there. There's going to be no human habitation in there, but it's going to be locked off. So 1 square mile by 1 square mile, whatever it is, will have a value associated with. Now, if it's a forest, then that carbon allocation will be put in there, because using LiDAR, they go in and get an average density of the tree species and how much CO2 that can sequester per year. And then whoever owns that forest, that's going to be off limits. And the minimum is 25 years that you have. If you're going to put your forest up on some of these trading markets, you have to lock in your forest for 25 years without a single tree cut, no human habitation in there. And that's going to be another pillar. But they're talking about doing hundreds countries and millions of square miles of forests being taken offline. And I'm thinking, where are people going to live if they do that? Because once the value is set that it has X value of, let's say, 1, well, if you go in there and start trimming trees out and using that, then the value of that base asset decreases in value. So then the new currency won't have, so they're going to keep it as a set value asset of it could be desert, maybe there's mining, maybe there's metals under it, but whatever it is, they're going to use the earth as a value to create, along with another pillar, to have these sort of 5 pillars running together to create a new currency. Now, what that would be as a unit out of all those 5 is something to be determined. But that's kind of where I've been taking a little bit of research, especially with this whole food growing thing. Because if they're going to do that, we're not going to be able to have the amount of growable acres that we have currently, because some of it's going to be converted back to grass. Currently gets $1 per acre. So it starts with grass. And then if any of you have a farm, like I'm always battling this scrub coming back in, and you can let it go for 2 years and it's already waist high, neck high. And before long, it's a forest again. So taking food growing area off to reconvert it to forest, to then assess a value to it. If there's half the people on the planet, you could reassess a lot of land values and take a lot of it off, so nobody would ever use it. And that value would remain exactly stable. It's more of like think of a forest as a stable coin, if you like cryptocurrency. And I'll leave it there, but those are kind of like the 5 pillars of where the new economy will be built out of after the fiat collapses. In my opinion, I'm just saying.
It's a very interesting idea about a stable, asset, because even humans are not stable assets because they live and die. So, under those circumstances. Just saying.
All right, Kerry, thank you for having me on. I would definitely come back in May and we'll go again, and I'll think of some new ideas to throw out there.
Great. And let us know what's really going on there. All right. Thank you so much, David. And, have a great day.
All right. You too. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.